All righty. We're on to item number 8 of the Sadavas. More charter school stuff. And while this is getting your stuff together, Grant did come back and say, yes, that SB 32 had been granted reconsideration.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you for the opportunity to share our findings from the charter schools research. I think most of you, if not all of you, know that this piece is the first in a series on the emerging education delivery methods, and this particular piece focuses on just some general information on charter schools, as well as some of the growth patterns that we're seeing in charter schools. We're going to look at CalSTRS and the selection of CalSTRS in charter schools. And then we have a small amount of survey data to help round out that picture. Hopefully we'll be answering some of the questions, and I'm going to try to kind of click through the slides so that there's plenty of time for conversation if desired. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge David Lindgren. He's right back there. And he is the researcher who did all of the work on this piece. So I'm very appreciative of the effort that he's gone to, and honored to have the opportunity to be the one to present on it. So first, a little bit of history on charter schools, just a bit. Charter schools date back 25 years. In 1992, the first charter school opened in Minnesota. That same year, the California Charter School Act was signed, and in 1993, the first public charter school opened in California in San Mateo County. So that sort of sets the stage, and what you're going to see is some of the data of what's been kind of progressing throughout that time period. So since 1993, 1,822 charter petitions have been approved, and currently 1,220 of those are active. And that's the same number that you heard yesterday discussed. And so it's really those 1,220 schools that we look at. I've got a couple of general slides on charter schools, and this one focuses on the authorizer of the charter. The vast majority, 87.2%, are authorized by the school district. And then a smaller group, the 11%, is authorized by the county offices of education, and that 1.8% is then authorized by state boards. This slide requires a bit of explanation. It is not indicating that 5% of the schools are for-profit. All of the schools are public schools, and this slide focuses on the management structure of those schools. The vast majority of those schools, almost 94%, have a nonprofit management structure, and that management structure can look two different ways. One of which is those schools might be individual entities, or two or more schools may be grouped together and managed by a nonprofit organization. And those nonprofit organizations are called charter management organizations. So when you are reading about them, they're referred to as CMOs. The 5.1% are managed by the for-profit management organizations. Okay? High level looking at those 1,220 schools, 89.4% provide CalSTRS retirement benefit as the selected retirement benefit at the school, and 10% select some other form of retirement. the charter is required to state what selection is being made for the particular school when the charter is being proposed before it's authorized. And this translates into almost 86% of the certificated FTEs at those charter schools being covered by CalSTRS, while 14.3% are covered in some other fashion. This presentation primarily presents percentages, and I think on this one it's nice to hear that almost 86%, it's over 33,000 teachers, and the 14% represents just approximately 5,500 teachers. All right, so we're going to switch gears, and you're going to see a couple of slides that look like this, and they're presented to try to show a picture of the status of charter schools and their relationship to the total public schools. So we're looking at traditional schools in the red bars and blue schools in the charter. And this data, I want to tell you exactly where it comes from. If I can, it's from the National Center of Education Statistics. And we've got it plotted back to the 99-2000 timeframe because that's when that database picks up that particular data variable. So that's how far back we were able to look. In the most recent year of data, the majority, that 92.8, almost 93% of total schools in the U.S. are operating as traditional schools, and 7.2% are operating as charter schools. So that's kind of the most recent slice that we can look at that comparison. This slide is oriented in this way so that you can also see sort of the growth pattern. And what you're going to notice is that on average, there's about 1.1% additional of the total schools being accounted for by charter schools every 3 years. And what I want you to do is kind of look at this pattern because the next slide is going to be what's happening in California. And the picture is a little bit different. In 14-15, we've got 12.2% in terms of charter schools compared to the 7.2% nationally. You have to adjust that a little bit because not every state has charter schools. Nonetheless, we're at that 12.2% here. And if you look at the growth rate every 3 years, we're looking at an additional 1.9% compared to the 1.1% that we see nationally. And then this is the translation to the public school teacher FTEs. And what you see in this slide in 14-15 is we've got 90.5% FTEs teachers working in the traditional style school and 9.5% working in the charter schools. And if you look at the trend over time, this chart is actually a bit different. In the first half up to 05-06, you've got an increase of just under 1%. On average, it's 0.8% increase teacher FTEs every 3 years. And then the pace picks up somewhat to 2.4% on average from 08-09 going forward. So now we're going to look a little bit at retirement plans at California charter schools. And what you see is that the majority of California charter schools offer CalSTRS as their retirement benefit. And this chart shows that pattern for the past 10 years. What you've got is an approximate 90% over that period of time, fairly steady data. And I'd like you to contrast that picture, with this picture, which looks at the data a little bit differently. It actually looks at the data of new schools, new charters being approved each year, and what those new approved schools are selecting for their retirement benefit. And what you're going to notice in the 15-16 year is that 66.7% have selected CalSTRS. And the most recent year that has similar data, it's not on this chart because there's not enough room for all of those years. The most recent year that we saw numbers that were similar to this were in 2000 and 2001. So there's a couple things to note about this, I think.
Before you go
Yes.
too much further, these charter organizations, the entity that is actually managing or running the school, they make the decision, not the people that they will employ, correct?
The people, it's decided in the charter.
Right, but it's the people creating the charter, not necessarily the employees that the charter will employ.
It is the people creating the charter.
So the employees would have absolutely no say. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Obviously, this is the chart that has our actuary's attention.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, when we all, I mean, again, we love the research Lisa and her team is doing here. This is really informing us about some trends we've got to think about.
Paul?
So when you refer to newly opened charter schools, is that new charter schools as well as conversions?
It's new charter schools including conversions. So any school that became a charter in that year.
So
And I'm going to double check. Is that correct, David?
and I think your report said that in the case of a conversion, that at least 50% of the existing teachers had to approve the conversion?
That's correct.
So those teachers would then, if they wanted to oppose the conversion because the conversion was going to take them out of CalSTRS, they could oppose the conversion, right?
Okay, so it's an interesting topic, and I've thought about it too. And I imagine that the connections that you're drawing are correct. My question would be is whether the teachers signing the contract, if they would be aware, like fully understanding all of those implications.
But I mean, they have to approve the conversion.
There
So-
there is a signature piece for conversions as.
Hopefully they are aware, or if there's a possibility that they're not aware, maybe something should be done about that. But I guess my biggest concern is, does that mean that you could have a school where 100% of the teachers are in CalSTRS, because it's a public school, and 51% of the teachers approve the conversion to a charter, and the other 49% are now all of a sudden no longer in CalSTRS against their will? Right?
But that's not what
Harry?
it was
I
yesterday.
see Ms. Dobbins kind of having a not kind of sure look. And my understanding is that is correct, Mr. Rosensteel. That is absolutely correct. And my experience, and only speaking from my experience with and I'm agnostic when it comes to charter schools. Agnostic. This is not a pro-charter school, and I'm only interested in retirement security for California's educators in this role. My experience with charters, only with my experience, is the details of the provisions within that charter are not necessarily fully understood by all of the people that are voting on whether or not they should convert to charter. So what would happen in that instance, whereas a 51-49 vote, the school becomes a charter, the 49 teachers who voted not to be in the charter, wanted to stay in the traditional school, would then have an option to either stay, or they would have to transfer or look for another job. I don't know if that falls under our purview, but I have you and I have spoken a little bit about maybe a suggestion. I'm going to wait till they get through the item as to addressing this slide as maybe an action we can follow up on. just want to clear it.
Lynn?
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I had a question, and I'm not sure this is the right place to ask it, but when a charter school has to renew their charter at that point, can they decide to either enter CalSTRS or exit CalSTRS?
And I'm sorry, did you say renew the charter?
Yes.
I am not familiar with renewal processes, and I'm not sure if anyone has that. My understanding about selecting CalSTRS is that once you select CalSTRS, you have CalSTRS unless you end the charter and then start over.
Okay, so the renewal of the charter has nothing to do with the organizational aspects of the charter school? Is it just whether or not the charter will be granted again based on performance, or?
And I'm not familiar with the renewal process. It's something that we could look into, or?
So I think what we're coming up with questions that, we know this is the first part of things that we're talking about with charter. So let's keep a record of the things that we want to know that we aren't, that have been unanswered today. And then we can do further research on it.
Okay.
Because I think that's huge. I'm also concerned about the parent trigger part of it, because I'm not sure in a conversion that comes from a directive from the parents of the district, if the teachers then have to weigh in on the conversion. So let's, we're gonna end up needing more information and trying to take action and things like that, so
Okay,
we'll just get the questions that we have. It's okay, we don't have answers today,
Okay.
but we're gonna get answers.
And that's fair enough. So the information we have currently on the charter schools that are kind of inspired by parents and communities is that it's actually, you have to have greater than 50% of the potential number of students that will be served, their parent or guardian signatures. So that's different than the conversion that requires the teacher signatures. Okay?
Uh-huh.
All right. Are we ready to go on? Okay. Okay. We'll try. There we go. All right. So we surveyed every charter school administrator that we had in our database. So we sent out the 2,000 some odd, or the 1,220 charter schools. We surveyed their administrators, and we heard back from 212 of them, which is about a 17% response rate, which is pretty good for an electronic survey, and yet it's only 17%. We looked at this variable, whether or not the respondents offered CalSTRS, to kind of judge whether the folks that we heard back from were representative of the population as a whole, and slightly more respondents are from schools that offer CalSTRS, which is not that surprising given that the survey came from us. So keep that in mind as we go through the findings here. I'm having trouble. So we asked folks that 6.6%, which was 14, and that is a small number of people. So we're not really dealing with a reliable, valid number. It's more of a case study situation with these. But we asked those 14 schools, what retirement plan did they offer? And what they told us, 42, almost 43% said they offer a defined contribution, and that 35.7% said they offer a defined contribution and Social Security, and then the 21% said that they offer Social Security alone.
If they have like matching with their DC plan or employer matching or?
We did not ask amounts or the way that it was shared or any of those details. We did, however, ask both groups, those who offer CalSTRS and those who don't, what led to their decision to either offer CalSTRS or to select some other retirement plan. And this slide summarizes that information. The top two responses, close to 25% each, said teacher recruitment and alignment with the district. And then the teachers already were CalSTRS members. That probably speaks to some of those conversions and the fact that CalSTRS is good for teachers. And clearly some of the respondents were not aware. 11.6% weren't aware of what led to that decision, and then 10% had some other reason for offering. And then those 14 who are not offering CalSTRS, 42.9% said due to cost, and then 35, almost 36% said that they weren't sure what led to the decision. Okay. So this is moving past the survey data and actually looking at database kind of data. We did this piece as an initial piece, as I explained, in this series that's being planned on education delivery methods. And partly why we looked into charter schools is because of the fact that online teaching is a very commonly offered in that arena. And this is the data reflective of that, 17%, the red and the green sections, are offering some form of online education. And we've asked those folks, hey, can we make contact with you and learn and understand more about that? So that was kind of our preemptive effort at getting going with the next piece.
I'll wait till the presentation's done.
I'm sorry? Absolutely.
Wow, are you clairvoyant?
Okay, great, thanks. Slide 11.
Do we want to go back?
Yes, please. Thank
And
you.
can you tell me which one we're going to?
11. It's the percentage of, keep going. It's the one that does right, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, so, I'm gonna try to be concise and focused on our mission, retirement security for California's educators, our duty of loyalty to the fund. California and our country needs more high-quality schools. Whether you call them public charter schools or public schools, we need more really good schools. There's a lot of debate about, a lot of noise about a lot of stuff. I don't think that's our purview here. What I do think is our responsibility is the retirement security. What is indisputable is that charter schools are public schools that are funded by public taxpayer dollars. This chart potentially has could have a very negative impact on our collective mission, potentially. So that's, I think, a concern for us. I think we also are recognized as although our critics would say not true, is that we're truth tellers about DB, DCs. I think the evidence is pretty clear about that. If pension funds are well funded and managed correctly, it's the best setup for retirement security. Beats DCs, beat DCs plus match, it's the right approach. So my question is what can we do about this? What do we have the ability to do? Should we be speaking with legislators and allies about, something about the legislation? I don't know what the right process is, but my sense is maybe we need some statewide legislation or a initial conversation, that if you're going to be a publicly funded public charter school in the state of California, there is one option, and the option is you're in CalSTRS. So that there is no mistaking, that's what the choice is. That's the cost of doing business in, when you're using taxpayer dollars to educate California's children and employ public school teachers in California. You know, that's just the cost of doing business, and you can calculate what it will be. So I would like to know whether or not there's, you know, where other people are on that issue. Because that's, I think, could be a growing concern for us on multiple levels. Because that grows, it has issues that the actuaries have to deal with, that we have to deal with. And it may only be a low number at this point, but it could grow. But I think more, maybe more importantly at this time, is by allowing that to perpetuate, it undermines what we're about, what we believe in. Because it says there's another option for you that's as good or better. And you know, we're going to make that decision for you. Idealistic teacher who wants to change the world and be part of a learning community and be part of a charter school. We'll take care of your retirement for you. And you're going to manage your 401k plan. I don't think that we should allow that to perpetuate. I think we have some control over that, at least the conversation.
You're here. Irina?
I just wonder if we have information at this point to actually measure the magnitude of the risk to the fund and whether we should get a little more of that kind of information before taking the next step of saying we should be doing something about. We need to actually know, you know, what does that 33% mean in terms of risk?
David and Rick will be modeling some of those liability issues in the report that we talked about, so you, right, guys? Yeah. All right, there you go, you heard it.
And it's just, and I think we need to take not only what the information that exists, but what that trend line is looking like. And as far away as 2 or 3 years ago, the trend line was growing quite alarmingly. And so I think we needed to take a look at that also.
Dan, I'm in full support of Irina's more measured
All part of the ongoing effort to wrap our arms around it.
When are we gonna get that information from auditors? Like, when is that report?
So Jack, where are we on the trajectory for having that type of information come back to the board?
I'm sorry, Brian and I were chatting, which information?
We're talking about
But
the
over.
actuarial input
Oh,
to
that's
the risk of
November.
the.
It's the risk report.
So the charter part of it will be all wrapped up in the
Yes.
risk report.
Yes, sorry.
All right,
Yeah.
Nora?
I also would be interested in knowing what is the legislature doing around this particular issue as it relates to pensions. I know that legislature is looking at different things around charter schools and sort of how they are funded, you know, the accountability piece. And and again, this is not pro or against charter schools. My comment is more of really trying to understand sort of where the leadership of the legislature and where they're at on this issue, so that we also can be part of that discussion, because I think it would be a very healthy discussion to have, because we will have the numbers and we'll have that information. And I think to your point, Harry, many of the times when these schools are getting created in local communities, like my community in the South Bay and San Diego, many of the times there's a lot of good faith efforts from parents and from teachers, but there's all these like this information that people are not getting, and then once they open up, there people are really like, wait a second, that's not what I signed up for. So I think we have a responsibility, absolutely, to really make sure we're monitoring this and we figure out a way to balance it with data, but at the same time really understanding some of what's already happening on the ground. So I would appreciate that as well.
And the things that we were going to be looking at moving forward, I know that public education has been looked at as, for lack of a better term, a hot commodity for alternative investors, hedge fund managers. And if you do any type of even just superficial research on the internet, there are a lot of hedge fund managers that are out there wanting to educate people about investing in for-profit charter schools. Are we going to be talking about any of that at all? Because I think that as we're getting away from the fact that these are being run for-profit and the fact that there's a cost implication to belonging to CalSTRS, that will start weighing into some of these trend lines that we're starting to see. So I hope that we take a look at that part of the equation also.
Well, we could even invite one of the investors in, or one of those hedge fund managers to see their perspectives on the.
We have somebody before us.
We
Before?
did, but that didn't go well. Thought we could try it again.
All right, is there anybody else that would like to speak on the issue or ask Alyssa any questions? So Alyssa, where were you planning on going next?
I'm sorry?
Or were you going to do any more on the charter?
Well, we were, so the research team is going forward looking at the technology side, right? What's being offered via charters and other venues, technology and education. Okay.
All right. I know one of the things that you and I talked about is just not only how is it being used in charters, but every day in schools. One of the things that I forgot to tell you about was like, for my middle school, we don't have a curricular program that's hard copied for our ELA program. It's actually a program called Study Sync, so all our ELA in the middle school is done online. English Language Arts. So, I gave you some other examples, so I would encourage any of the board members that know of other programs or know of people that Alyssa can get a hold of, please reach out to her, and that would help her efforts greatly.
Dina, as I think about what we've been talking about, I think we've mentioned charter schools as so many angles today. I think what would be better to do, we may not make the board turnaround deadlines because to have a meeting next month, it's within days. But I think I can bring to you, I need to work with our staff in each of the areas, but I think we should bring an outline in July of what we think we're going to be tackling around these charter schools, because we've got political piece, we've talked about audits piece, we talked about a communication piece, we
Right.
talked about a finance piece, an actuarial piece. Let's see if we can pull together an outline what we want to study and make sure I've got all the pieces covered this year.
Yeah,
for
because
you.
I think
And-
when we start talking about online education,
Yeah.
it is going to be much broader than just the charter
Yeah,
piece of it.
I think we need one more conversation to make sure we're going to meet all of our needs here. So let's do that in July.
All right, Harry?
And maybe a more practical approach, as opposed to being way down here, is like you said, we get about 17% response to, I think, 1,300 schools or so. Would be simply a disclosure requirement that the charter schools would have a transparency and disclosure obligation to the retirement system to inform us as to what retirement plan they are offering. And it's simply disclosure, or to the State Board of Ed. I don't know whom that disclosure would go to, but you have to let some public agency know so that it's of record, that people can just have that data point. That seems to be a relatively reasonable request.
Okay.
Ready? Paul?
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is getting back to a question about actually the material in our board packet. So if you look at that, that seems to say that of the newly opened charter schools in 15-16, that a third of the schools chose something other than CalSTRS. But if you look at, and that is on TRB 121, that same chart. But if you look at TRB 122, it seems to say something kind of the opposite. And I'm just trying to understand, because if I look at TRB 122, it seems to me to say that 2/3 of the newly opened charter schools in 15-16 chose something other than CalSTRS.
So I think that is because the chart on 122 doesn't start at 0. I think that's the red goes up to the 66 5.7, and I think it's an optical illusion, perhaps.
Oh, I see, the bottom is not,
Yes.
The bottom is
is not at
CalSTRS.
0.
Yes, I think, and I apologize for any confusion in the slides. We did that because starting the charts at 0, you wind up with really big charts or really tiny stuff, and then you can't read the points of inflection to kind of see the change.
Normally expect charts to start at 0 unless it's noted otherwise, so that, my mistake.
And we meant to note it at the beginning. I don't know if we missed that.
That's fine, I didn't understand, I misread it, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Harry?
Elisa, does this slide represent the schools that you received the reports back, or that's all schools?
No, this is not survey data. This is a database.
Oh, so we
data.
have the
This is from-
Yes,
information
Department
about
Yes,
how many are in CalSTRS and how many are
yes, and
of
that,
the entire universe, not just the 200 that responded.
yes.
Okay, so-
Yes, and probably more on the tip of David's tongue would be the source for that data. I've got it in my notes if you would like it. But that's not survey data, that's actual data.
All right, Joy?
Yeah, I wonder if as part of the, what comes back to the committee later, when we were talking about this slide earlier, we were wondering what kind of information the teachers, public school teachers who are voting on the conversion, what kind of information they would have, including, whether they would be informed about whether or not conversion to a charter would mean that they would get their retirement benefits through CalSTRS or some other type of option. I guess I just wonder if it's possible to gather a little bit more information on that, and if there are requirements in place for what need to be disclosed to teachers as they're making that selection.
And I think that there would probably be some decent anecdotal evidence to that if you reached out to some of our constituency groups, CTA. They have a dedicated charter school organizer and have collected massive amounts of data on charter schools. And then I would imagine that AXA would also.
We could look into that.
Thank you.
Harry?
Sure, I think it's interesting on that point is, one, do you know the implications? You're going to vote yes to go charter for all the reasons why you would, right? Because you want autonomy, you want flexibility, you want all of that. But would you still vote yes if you knew your retirement was going to be in a 401k as first defined benefit?
Where you bear all the risk.
And
The implications of what
the
that actually
implications,
is.
would you still vote yes? I've had personal experience where I've seen a lot of folks who say, I didn't realize that, and no, I won't. So would you still make the same decision if you had all of the information in front of you? So,
But teachers don't know the difference between those things.
Or like what the results were for, what your returns were during that whole huge market downturn if you were in a 401k. Jury?
Yeah, is there any way to know of the 33% that opted not to pursue CalPERS if those are conversions or new schools?
I was wondering that as well. I don't have that data with me. I don't know if David knows if it's available.
It's available, but I don't know off the top of my head.
So it's something that we could look into, and I've noted it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
All right, anyone else?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's an awful lot of information, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the spark that it's given to us to have further conversations, to wrap our arms around that whole
Very good, thank you very
issue.
much.
Alrighty. We are on 9A and B. So Graham and John, if you can come on up. And Larry, I'm going to give you a heads up too. So John and Graham, and I think Larry might also have some information for us. when we were having the panel this morning on IT and we started talking about some of the reporting, I asked the two consultants to the board if there was anything talked about that sparked some ideas that they wanted to talk to us about. And I know that there's some auditing, there's some things happening within the audits committee and within our audit department or division that Larry might want to talk to us about. So gentlemen, how would you like to do this? Do you want to talk about that first? Do you want to do your reports and put that at the end? What's your pleasure?
Maybe we do the reports and then put it towards the end.
Sounds great.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. And then Larry, when we get into that, if you want to come on up. Great, thank you.
All right.
Hi.
Hi. So good afternoon, everyone. Graham Finley with Grant Thornton, here to provide our regular independent oversight report. And I'll be providing my regular report on the pension solution project in terms of accomplishments and what we see as risks or concerns. The other item, I guess fairly timely given the discussion this morning, based on a request that came at the May board meeting, we've created some questions that we think the board may want to consider about the project as they look forward to the project leadership's presentation to you at the July board meeting. And so that's what I'm going to conclude my part of the presentation, and maybe we'll sort of slide into some of the governance committee stuff then.
Thank you.
Okay. There you go. All right, so starting with a summary of progress on pension solution. Since our last board meeting, the project has made fairly significant progress on a number of areas around governance and project management processes, particularly around change management and some of the outstanding changes that were existing a month ago. The project is progressing through contractor acceptance testing for functional release 1, but that testing is behind schedule. And that's the major contributor to functional release 1 now running late. In addition, functional release 2 is also running late, although by a smaller margin due to delays with some of the design sessions. I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. So based on that, our overall assessment of the pension solution project continues to be yellow plus based on a number of concerns that I'll talk about right now.
Graham, how long was phase 4 supposed to last originally?
Oh, well, it's still the planned end date for phase 4 is still in the future. I have a slide and a couple of slides.
Okay,
so it's not late as in it should have been done already. It's just progressing late in terms of where the project was planning to be at this point in time.
I just can't, because we've talked about it, this is such a huge project, it's taken so many years, I can't remember how far out phase 4 ran, when do we become operational and the maintenance kind of starts and that kind of stuff. We 2, 3.
Yeah, so I'll touch a little bit on that for
Great,
the
thank
nearest
you.
implementation on 2 slides out, and then we can talk a bit about that.
Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of project achievements, the project revised their governance plan and approved that, and we think that's actually a fairly significant milestone because we think there were some pretty strong improvements in the project's governance processes that came out of that. The 2 main concerns that we had last month when we talked to you were around a series of change requests around functional release 1, and those have been resolved formally in the last month, as well as some changes to the actual process for managing change requests, which we think will be effective for the project too. The other area of concern was around a series of outstanding data conversion issues where there was some lack of clarity about how they were going to be dealt with and who was going to be responsible for those. There's been verbal agreement on the resolution to that and formal written agreement on some of it, although for some of those agreements were still not waiting for the formal write-up, so they're not quite closed out yet, but generally there's an agreement on strategy around those. The major concerns we have at this point are really around schedule. And so in particular, as I mentioned, functional release 1 contractor acceptance testing, and that is where CGI is conducting their testing of the system to basically ensure it meets the requirements for the system. That's running behind by approximately 10 weeks, and it's progressing more slowly than expected. The joint application development sessions for functional release 2 are also behind by about 4 weeks, and we're concerned that the projects basically hit capacity in terms of their ability to handle any additional changes and any significant defects. It's straining the project's capacity to sort of take any additional work on. Now, based on that, and this is where I'll get to talk about the schedule a little bit. So this is it's sort of a summary graphic of the main activities for the project leading up to functional release 1 going live. Despite the delays that the project has experienced to date, it's still in a position to make the March 2018 go live for functional release 1. When I talked to you last month, I think I made a point that the project had built quite a significant buffer into its schedule, basically additional time in case delays were going to happen. These delays have basically eaten away at that buffer, but the buffer isn't gone. There's still some buffer left in the schedule. So the project does have the capacity still to hit that March date, but as this testing continues to delay, it's eating away at that buffer and getting it closer and closer to a point where it may be challenging to hit the implementation date. Probably the key milestone that I would draw your attention to in the next few months that people are paying a lot of attention towards is the beginning of user acceptance testing, which is scheduled to happen in September. So that's the point where CGI completes their contractor acceptance testing. They basically assert to CalSTRS that the software works and it's ready for CalSTRS to take over the testing process. That's scheduled for September. If the project's able to hit that date, then they're on a solid track to being able to implement in March as planned. If that date is missed, then you start to get into some questions about what has to scrunch down or does there need to be a delay to the implementation date. So any questions about that before I move on to, okay, so based on that and thinking of the July board presentation that the project leadership is going to be giving you around the scope, schedule, and the plans for the implementation. And we're assuming for the July board presentation that the implementation date that will be projected will still be March of 2018 when the project comes back in a month's time. One of the things that I've heard from the board and the comments you've made is a general prioritization of quality over schedule, and that, dates are important, but having a quality product is more important than hitting a certain date. Right? And I've seen a lot of nodding, so I'm assuming I've interpreted that correctly. So based on that, these are a set of questions that are really quite focused around the lead-in to implementation of functional release 1, but I'd say they have a common theme underlying them, and it's really about how the project is going to ensure the maintenance of a quality product and a successful implementation as they're driving towards an implementation date. So I'll sort of hit these fairly quickly. The first one is whether or not the scope is now finalized for functional release 1 or any additional changes expected. Obviously, if there is a significant defect in the product or the software doesn't work for some reason, you have to fix it and take whatever consequences there are in terms of additional work. But at this point in the project, any additional changes to the scope, new functionality, are really going to have an impact. And as you get closer and closer to the beginning of user acceptance testing, that impact becomes greater and greater. So that's a significant question. The second one is how is the project going to decide that it's actually ready to begin user acceptance testing? So how are they going to judge that when CGI comes to CalSTRS and says the software works, it's ready to move over into UAT? How is CalSTRS going to judge that that's actually a true statement? And then when CalSTRS is going through the user acceptance testing process, how will it decide that it's been successfully completed and the software is ready to start that process of moving into production? Third question is around training. The project has a pretty detailed training plan and process in terms of how the training is going to be put together and who's responsible for what. But a couple of things that we think are worth paying attention to is, one, who is judging that the training materials are of a sufficient quality so that they are going to be effective in training the workforce? And also, how is the project going to make sure that the actual software product that they are being trained on is stable and represents the actual product that will be in production, and that the software isn't changing during the training process? The fourth question is around the go-no-go decision on implementing functional release 1 into production. How is that decision going to be made? What are the criteria, and how will CalSTRS judge that it's ready to go live, or what might cause it to decide, no, we're not, and we have to postpone the go-live date? And then the last question is really a post-go-live question, But you'd normally expect for any significant project implementation like this, there's going to be some impact to day-to-day operations. You know, new processes, new stakeholders had to be trained, both internal CalSTA staff as well as external stakeholders, like employers. What is the expected impact to day-to-day operations? You normally expect a productivity dip after a new system goes live as people get used to it. What is that expectation? Is there some metric that people are looking for that we can measure and see whether that impact is as we were expecting, or it's more or it's less? So those are a series of questions that we would suggest you might be a useful conversation with the project in the July board meeting. Not that the individual details of all the individual checklist items and so on are that relevant at your level, but I think the philosophy behind them and the projects and CGI's position on how are they going to maintain a quality product as the project moves up to this implementation would be, I think that would be a productive conversation to have. So at that point, I'll take questions.
Okay, the whole thing's not working. Okay, so, hang on a second, let me see if I can do this. All right, I think that you all ought to be able to use your mics. So Harry and then Karen. Or are they all open? They're not all open, are they? Will they go green? Gentlemen, if I close it and restart it, would that help, you think?
Actually, we've already prepared. We'll bring you your mic.
Okay, thank you. It's probably me keeping bashing in the mic with my papers over here that's probably at it.
What happens if you exit?
That's what I was thinking, but they don't think that's gonna be doing it.
The system's tired, it wants to go home.
I think there's some of us that can relate to that. Okay, we'll go that way. So Karen, since you got it first, you wanna go? Harry?
Just want to push this button here.
There's a button below the band that you have to push.
I got it.
Go
Is
ahead.
it working? Working? It's green.
You guys can hear?
They might have to turn up the volume. Get right on top of it.
You can hear me? Okay. I guess I'm confused about the suggested questions for consideration by the board. Does this mean that we're going to be thinking about these, so in July, we're going to ask you these, and then you'll tell us the answers? I'm not sure.
So the project leadership, so Ashish and Andrew are going to come to present to you in July on the status of the project and the plan for implementation in the future with a date for FR1 and then some general plans for functional release 2. These are questions that we would suggest that you have a conversation with project leadership about. Obviously, we're looking at these things and we'll have our own opinion about them, but we think it would be worthwhile for you to have a direct dialogue with the project leadership on these topics at the July board meeting.
Okay. Okay. So your organization is one part of this project, is that right?
Yeah, so we are.
And then the other the project team or leadership is the other part of it. I guess I'm just trying to figure out the organization.
Yeah, Cassandra, can you go ahead and explain how the hierarchy of what we have going on here?
Right. We talked about it a little bit when we met last week, where we have Team CGI is the vendor, and their partners, their subcontractors, Sagitech and Encore, are the vendor makeup of the outside contractors that are Team CGI. I think CalSTRS has our internal team where we have our internal resources, we have our own contractors on staff helping us do the work that's being performed internally. And then we have oversight consultants.
Before you get to oversight consultants, Ashish and Andrew, can you guys stand up so Karen can see who the two leads are for staff for this? Okay, thanks.
Ashish and Andrew are co-sponsors of the project because Andrew's our technology officer and Andrew is the business executive over which the administration is going to be implemented. And then the executive steering committee is those two plus myself and Robin. So there's a lot of governance structure overseeing the project, but the oversight, independent oversight consultants are these two individuals here. Grant Thornton, who Graham Finley is representing, is the board's consultant, and they're on staff here evaluating the activities and identifying risks and things that we need to be aware of from their expertise that they're bringing in-house. And then John Lemelin, who is from Maximus, is another oversight consultant who provides more technical evaluation on some of the technical components of the implementation for us to consider. And his organization reports internally to staff, but they do both provide valuable information that we have them both reporting to you to give you information that might be helpful to you and understanding where we are.
So they don't talk to each other?
Oh,
Yeah,
all the
no, we
time.
all talk.
Okay.
We talk constantly. I mean,
I think they
our
all
meetings
talk.
every
All
5 minutes.
players
Yeah.
are talking all the time.
And then
Okay.
Sharon and I get intermittent reports in between board
Okay.
meetings from Graham.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Ashish and Andrew and Cassandra. Harry?
So you have the questions in advance, essentially. We're giving you the test questions in advance, so I'm gonna just suggest that you work on those questions and come back in July and walk us through your answers to the questions, and you're just getting them in advance, in addition to other questions that may arise. But I'm gonna take their advice that these are good questions for us to get feedback from the leadership team on. You now have them in advance, so we look forward to getting your replies. No surprise questions except the other ones that aren't there. If that's okay with you.
So I have Nora next and then Paul. Nora? Oh!
But, so my question is around the training plan. When we do get an actual plan, I think it would be great to see sort of an actual timeline. I mean, I know that it's March 2018 and sort of like background. And how do we make sure that people are, the accountability piece is making sure that people are trained? So you get trained, is there testing, or how do we make sure that people kind of get it? I guess is the piece, right? And then I had one more question, but I can't remember what it was. It was the training piece and the timeline, and I will remember the other one at some point. But if not, I'll let Cassandra know.
And then just a reminder, we're coming back in July for one to bring to you the change requests that reset the schedule for the March 18th, a deadline for functional rollout 1. So those are the time schedules that we had changed from the original high-level estimate on when we were going to hit our completion dates on these functional rollouts. So that's one of the things that we will be bringing to you, is that with a change, an amendment to the contract for a small adjustment.
I remembered my question.
You good?
No, I remember the question that I wanted to ask.
Oh,
One
go
more.
ahead.
So the last question is, and I think at some point before you mentioned this, but I just want to make sure that in July we go over sort of what is the crisis management piece if everything, like, for some reason doesn't work when it actually goes live. Just to be reminded about what that plan is and how we're going to make sure that all of the data is protected and confidentiality and all that piece. So, because I've gone through that in my agency and I've seen it been very successful, but I've also seen it when it just kind of, there was a glitch. So that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
So Cassandra, for me, I think what we're looking at is having a couple of new board members, and there's just so much that's already gone by. And then for me, even being as closely tied to it as Sharon and I are, it's almost like we have pension solution overbrain type stuff, or overload. So maybe just a high-level one-pager in July that talks about where we started, the projects that have been done, just that kind of high-level overview, just to remind us that we really are progressing really well. This was an immense undertaking, and just kind of where we are in it, and you know what, do you know what I'm talking about? Alrighty,
I was just gonna say also Karen and Jerry actually aren't going home. They've got 8 hours more with us on Monday. We're gonna, as part of that, we're gonna go through that with them too.
But we can do a summary of where we started and where we are, and just an overview, a refresher. Yeah.
because we had we had DIP,
Yeah.
and what else before that? Business Direct.
There's a bunch of acronyms in there.
So, I mean, if we can,
Yeah, yeah.
some of us have lived this for a long time, and God forbid, I live with START, the beginning of that, like you were talking about earlier. I just think sometimes when we get, because we're getting really pretty weedy, that we've forgotten where we were at a 50,000 foot level. We could just remind us, that would help some of us. Alrighty, thank you. Paul?
Oh, and just,
Is this working now?
You have to press it so it's green.
Well, I'm just gonna talk, whether it works or not. Graham, thank you for the questions. I actually sort of had the same question that Karen did, which is I didn't know who was supposed to ask these questions of whom, when. So I appreciate the clarification. So on, these are suggested questions. I would encourage you to come up with any other questions and ask them on our behalf at the next meeting, especially based on anything that might transpire between now and then. So, you know, I love the idea of your suggesting questions, but I'd also invite you to ask questions on our behalf in our presence. No, absolutely. Thank you.